Hello, and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzie. Here in the Appalachian Mountains, when we think about religions, we often think about Baptist, Old Regular Baptist, Primitive Baptist, Methodist, the predominant Christian groups. But there's more diversity in Appalachia when it comes to religion than we might note at first glance. My guest today, Marcy Vartanian, is a senior communication major at Appalachian State and a religious studies minor. And she's done a fascinating project to enter studies based on the idea of diversity in Appalachia among religions. So Marcy, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hear all about your project and hear about some of the many diverse traditions that you found in your study. But why don't you start by just telling us about your studies, who you are, how you got interested in communication studies, and how you got interested in religious studies as well.
Yeah, so I actually applied to App with an English major, and then I went to the orientation and realized that that was not what I wanted to do. So I knew I wanted to write, so I quickly switched to journalism and instantly fell in love with the program. All the professors there are incredible and super dedicated, and it was in my intro to journalism class, I think, that we learned about the Catholic Church scandal and how the Boston Globe covered that. And I instantly fell in love with like investigative journalism and all that. And that made me more curious about how journalists covered religion, because I realized, I live near Charlotte, so, you don't see a lot about religion in the news in general, and you definitely don't see a lot about it in the Boone area unless it's like, this church did this, or like telling you about like little events they have. Other than that, you just don't see things covered really. And so I got really curious about it, and I kind of chose it as my beat to cover for another journalism class. And I covered what's it called, King Street Church, which was fascinating to me. I was blown away by that group and just what they were trying to achieve and stuff like that, and that just made me more curious. And then for my capstone class in journalism, I covered underrepresented religions, as well as a little different because I had to work with a partner. But so that's why I wanted to do this independent study, was to cover more broadly and do more in-depth research for it.
Great. Well, you mentioned something that kind of interests me. You said that it's hard to find coverage of religion in newspapers now. That didn't used to be the case. Almost every major newspaper would have a regular religion feature and a religion editor. So has that been something that has changed with journalism in the last decade or so?
Yeah, I think it's mostly because as we as a society are becoming more open to more open concepts, we're understanding that people can be agnostic, or people are very religious, or, there's like very extreme ideas. And I think people are getting more offended more easily. So people are more afraid to touch subjects like that. They're more afraid to, write a story on a religious activity or a religious event or just religion in general, and they're afraid they're going to step on someone's toes, or they're afraid they're going to offend someone, or maybe they're not even afraid. It's just easier to do that, and nothing's worse than, being a big time newspaper or even a local newspaper and getting emails and letters and phone calls back from readers and being like, I can't believe you wrote that, like this hurt my feelings, like that's not what our religion's like, and so I think that a lot of newspapers and magazines and stuff are just kind of veering away from it a little bit, and just kind of like, I don't want to say covering the bare minimum, because that sounds like they're lacking, 'cause I don't think that's what they're trying to do. I think they're just like, hey, like this church is having an Easter event, or like this new church got built, or like, hey, App State hosts all these little, churches where you can go into the student union and go into this room, and, you can go to this church service kind of deal.
I guess it's that old saying that you risk offending people if you talk about politics or religion in polite company. So I can see that, but it's a shame really that there's not
for sure
coverage of religion and society, religion and culture. Maybe you can do that once you're at your degree. So how did you get interested in underrepresented religious groups? I think that's a fascinating topic, but in Appalachia especially, what piqued your interest in that topic?
Yeah. So after I did the interview with King Street Church, it kind of made me curious to see, you walk down King Street, and I think there's a total from like where the school starts to the end of King Street, I think that there's at least 5 or 6 churches, you know, and they're all Christian churches, whether it's Baptist, Methodist, you know, whatever. And I was just like, all right, but like, what else is there here? You know, like everyone knows that, you know, Boone is notorious for not being super diverse, and they're working on that. So I was like, what about religion? And so I kind of looked into that, and I found the Jewish temple, and I actually, one of my coworkers, she goes there, so I was talking to her about it a little bit. So that's kind of where it started. And then from there, I was more curious and looked into more things. And it was actually kind of really hard to find places, you know, just in the surrounding area. There's a lot of like little groups that met, you know, like the people of the Baha'i faith, like they don't really have a location around here where they meet. They just go to someone's house and they have, you know, their services and stuff there. So it was really hard to find actual physical locations, besides, again, the student union. But I'd say at least 95% of those, again, were of Christian faith. And so that's when I kind of realized I wanted to dive more into it to see what the high country area in general had to offer people that weren't of the Christian faith.
Okay, so for the purpose of your study, I guess the main representation for religion in Appalachia would be Christian. Now there might be diversity within that kind of representation, but then anything that is not Christian, from your study's perspective, would be considered an underrepresented group. Is that?
I would say so, yeah. I mean, even like pagans, like I know that the App State has a pagan association. I thought that was really interesting that they had that. You know, they have Hillel at App State and stuff like that. So yeah, I kind of considered it might be, you know, a broad umbrella term, and I wasn't trying to exclude anyone in it, but the way I did view it was that, you know, anybody that wasn't a Christian faith, you know, whatever, you know, type of Christian faith, Baptist, Methodist, again, you know, anything, I kind of was not looking to cover those because, again, I feel like those are covered a lot, and I think it's important to open up people's eyes and be like, hey, these other communities are around you, whether or not you want to be a part of them. It's still important to be aware and to recognize them, you know, whether, because like you could meet someone and they could be like, I'm struggling here because I can't find, you know, the faith group that I want to be a part of, and just to know, to like be like, hey, I know there's a Jewish temple down the road, why don't you go there, you know, and they can help you. I think that's so important, and something that just people today in general like lack that ability to do, you know.
So I guess your project in some ways just raises awareness. There aren't large numbers of people who are in underrepresented groups, but there is some rather significant diversity with underrepresented groups across the spectrum. And you mentioned 3. You mentioned the Jewish temple in Boone. You mentioned Baha'i, and you mentioned the pagan group, which I guess some people might question whether that should be considered a religion or not. So what other kinds of traditions would you consider groups that are underrepresented in Appalachia?
Yeah, I mean, like, when I tackled this project, I wasn't necessarily just looking for religions either. I was looking for, you know, spirituality groups too. So, you know, the Art of Living Center was one that I found, and it was incredible. And I'm so bummed I didn't get to go there and interview people and visit it myself, because just from the videos, I mean, it's gorgeous. But, you know, so they don't classify as a religious group. They go there and they help you, you know, reach peace, and it's more of a spiritual place where people can go there, and each person has kind of a different experience. But overall, from what I understood, like the gist of it was they want you to go there and to kind of like let things go and to like just be calmer and find your inner peace and stuff like that, which I thought was cool. And then you know, another one that I found was Mount Soma, which was fascinating to me, and that one was more of the Hindu traditions, if I remember correctly, and that one took a little bit more digging for me to find. I did not find that one at first. It was the last one I ended up finding. It's also known as the land of the Veda, or the enlightened city, and it's kind of up, it's more near Asheville than it is near Boone here, but I still thought it was just fascinating that these places kind of exist within the mountains, and they're kind of hidden, and like it seems that not a lot of people know about them unless you like are actively looking for it. And so basically, again, I was just looking for anything that like one wasn't really well covered and that wasn't Christianity mostly. I found an Islamic mosque, but I had a really hard time finding a lot of information about that one too. And so I didn't cover that one in my presentation because their website was just it wasn't there wasn't a lot of information on it, and I couldn't get a hold of anyone, so I didn't want to put information about their religion that was incorrect, or anything about their establishment again that was wrong, or that I didn't want to assume anything, because that's again something that you can do that creates a stereotype, which is what's causing people to be uninformed or misinformed about their religions, which is not a good thing.
Yeah, so I want to come back a little later and talk about some of those groups that you just mentioned, like the Art of Living Center. But I think you said a word there that's important when we talk about religious traditions, and that's stereotype. Oftentimes, I think in culture, in popular culture, we have a tendency to employ stereotypes to describe anyone or any tradition that is different from our own, if we don't fully understand it. So it sounds like that in addition to raising awareness, your project's really good in that it provides information that helps us to avoid falling back on stereotypes that may or may not have truth embedded within them.
Yeah. So actually one of my journalism classes, something that we covered, because we shortly covered religion in it, was something that people tend to do is they tend to look at someone and see their race and instantly assume their religion because their race. And it's like, that's not true. It's like, you can't just do that. Like, you can't look at me and be like, hey, I'm a white female from a middle-class family in America, she's Christian. Like, you can't do that, because especially in today's age, again, like, people will break from their religion, or people will grow up a religion and then realize that's not what they want and then change faiths, or they're not, or they're agnostic, or they're atheist, or, they're struggling to figure out what they are because they just were never raised with their religion, but they want to be religious, but they're unsure. And so I think that's a really big thing that we as a society do, is we look at people's race and we're like, oh, they're from, wherever, so they're automatically this religion. It's like, that's not okay. And I think we're all a little guilty of it, and it's like, it's okay to like look at them and be like, oh, like, they look like this, but it's not okay to instantly go up to them and be like, oh, so like, are you Jewish? Like, that's not okay ever. It's never okay to assume anyone's religion. And so I think that's something important that we need to recognize, that we as a society do more and do it not at all.
Right. Yeah. I think the remedy for those sorts of temptations to jump to conclusions or to employ stereotypes, the remedy to that is more education, more and better information, and that's what you're doing here with this project. I want to talk about the project just a little bit, because you really kind of had to overcome some hurdles and challenges this semester. I know your original research design was first of all, you had to find underrepresented groups, which presented ones, and you had to sort of expand your geographical area. But then your original research design was to employ heavy use of interviewing at these locations. Now, just as you were getting ready to start those interviews, Appalachian broke for spring break and never came back. We got stay-at-home orders. We went to online instruction. So the interview part of your project just couldn't happen. So how did you deal with that? I mean, you really had to pivot quickly in order to complete the project. So describe that process to me. How did you pivot so quickly and still come out with a great product in the end?
Yeah, it was really hard. It was honestly really heartbreaking, because I had spent all this time already like finding, religious groups that, one, I could get a hold of, and two, that had agreed to do interviews with me that I knew would be awesome and I could get great footage, because I was going to make, like 5-minute videos about these places, just like to inform people, to be like, hey, watch this video and you can learn about this place. And it was so heartbreaking when all this happened and I had to pivot, because I was like, I don't want to write a paper. The last thing I wanted to do was write a paper, because I was like, how am I going to write a paper about all these places and not have it be like, 50 pages long? And I didn't want to do that. And I didn't want to have to edit that, because I know I would get on a tangent about one of them and be like, oh, I have to go back and write about this other. So I was like, I don't want to write a paper. So it was so hard for me because I was trying to figure out a way to potentially still do the interviews, but it was really hard for me because here at home I don't have any of the editing software. So even if I did get them, whether it was just audio, because I had two of the people offer to do audio interviews, whether it was over the phone or over something like this, and I was like, I have no way of editing that. So like it has to go perfectly, nothing. And I live with, two of my siblings and 3 dogs, and I can't guarantee nothing crazy will happen outside my door. And I just wasn't willing to risk that. And then there was like a month period where I heard back from no one because everyone was in the process of transitioning to, staying at home and online, which was totally okay.
Right.
But it was a lot. And then I finally decided that like a presentation would kind of be the best because I could kind of enforce what I had learned myself into this presentation. It would still be a way to like inform people, because again, that was my whole goal, was to inform people about these underrepresented religions. I wasn't trying to be like, hey, the high country, isn't good about, being diverse. Like that's not, it just happens in some spots. Some spots just aren't that diverse. And I don't think it's a matter of like that location is purposely trying not to be diverse. I don't think that's ever the case. But I was trying to inform people and be like, hey, these religious or spiritual groups exist here.
Right.
Recognize them, help them not get bashed, help them not have stereotypes created against them, be informed of these places. I had to stop myself in the presentation because I was like, I could go on and on and on and make this like 100 PowerPoint slide, but I was like, I gotta stop. It's like after a point, it's like, here's the basic information. Now people can look into it more. They have a basis for like what it is, for good information of like how it formed. I tried to include, the founders of most of the religious groups,
Right.
at least in that location. But it was definitely really hard. It was very heartbreaking. I was gonna use a lot of it for my journalism portfolio too. So that was hard to switch to. And then once I did switch to the presentation, I definitely sat here for like a few days looking at that like giant stack of books you gave me and being like, I don't want to do this. Like there's nothing more heartbreaking than like being halfway through like a big project and then having to completely change it.
You did a great job. I mean, I thought you're being able to shift gears like that in the middle of the semester and still produce a great product. And I guess the viewers have probably intuited by now that you did this presentation and project for me as part of one of your classes. So I can say with confidence that the end product was very exceptional, very professional. So you should be proud of it.
Thank you.
Just a little bit about a couple of the groups that you found. You mentioned a couple of them already. So one of them is very local, just outside of Boone, the Art of Living Center. And you described it as more of a spiritual tradition than a religious tradition. And I think the folks there would probably agree with you that there is a connection to the ancient practice of Ayurveda, which comes out of Hinduism. But the Living Center itself is not so much a Hindu practice place, I guess, if you can put it that way. So tell us a little bit the Art of Living Center. And yeah, I'm sorry you really didn't get to see that in person. You'll have to, once some of the restrictions get lifted, you'll have to go out there. It's a beautiful place.
Oh, for sure. I definitely plan to. So the Art of Living Center, actually, there's a lot of them, but there obviously is one in Boone. But they were founded by Sri, yeah. Is his name?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sri Shankar. Yeah.
And they exist in over 150 countries around the world, which was amazing to me to find that out. I had no idea and was completely blown away that he had created something like that. But I actually was able to have a phone interview to get a little bit more information about it. And one of the guys that I interviewed said, while there's no direct religious connection at the Art of Living Center, many of the practices are based off of texts and practices from the Hindu philosophy, kind of like you said. Which was kind of interesting that they do that, but they have all kinds of practices there. Like their food bases are a lot of plant-based foods, but they can accommodate to any kind of diet at all. which they pride themselves on. There's lots of like meditative gardens there, and it's all very peaceful. And just the fact that the founder, his goal in life is to see a smile on everyone's face, was one of the things it said on their website, which was amazing to me, because I feel like that's just like, it's such a simple goal, but it's such an easy goal with a place like that, where like you literally go and people go there for peace retreats, just to find peace, do yoga for the weekend, get massages of like all different kinds. Like you can't just go to like a masseuse down the street and everyone there is just so happy and peaceful, and there's just nature all around you, including the view of the gorgeous Blue Ridge Mountains.
Right, yeah.
So
there's a big meditation hall there too, right? So meditation is a kind of central part of the practice at the Art of
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we got this group, or this place, which is tied to the ancient Hindu tradition, right in the middle of a lot of churches that are Baptist, Methodist, and so forth. It's really just interesting in and of itself, and seems a little exotic. And another tradition that you happened upon that's also kind of exotic for this area is Baha'i.
Yeah.
I think you had to go to Asheville for that one, but tell me a little bit about Baha'i, because that's something that a lot of our viewers might not know much about.
So I also had never heard anything about this religion. I had no idea. I was like, what is that? I actually learned about it from watching one of the Religion and Life episodes. And it's really fascinating, because it's this group of people. And again, like I said earlier, they don't really have, a temple or like a church or anything where they meet. They kind of just meet in each other's homes, or sometimes they'll meet, in like, I don't want to say warehouses, but like big locations if they have bigger groups. But most of the time it's smaller and more, comfy and intimate, and it's just at people's homes, and they just meet there. Before everything got shut down, I actually was invited to go to one of their services that they were going to have in someone's home, but it ended up falling through since the shelter in place happened. And I was super bummed, because I was very excited to go view it, because one of their beliefs is just the openness of God and religion, and of humanity, and the freedom from prejudice. And I mean, they have infinite amounts of beliefs if you just like go to the Baha'i Faith website. But mostly they just want to like coexist peacefully, which I found incredibly interesting as a religion, because I feel like most religions are like, this is our religion, this is our core belief, we believe in this one God, or multiple gods, and we have to do what they say, and we have all these rituals and everything. But the Baha'i Faith seems to be more loose, it's more fluid, it's more just like coexist with your people and do what's good for the community, and like just, again, kind of like the Art of Living Center, like live peacefully. And I had no idea about any of this, so like everything for this one was totally like brand new learning. So I kind of like double checked everything to make sure that like it didn't change. I mean, like if you look at like Christianity, like from Baptist to Methodist, to Presbyterian, like it's like a little different to each one. But I wanted to make sure, because this was an entire new religion to me, that it was correct.
Well, it's a fairly young religion. I think it was founded in the early 19th century, so it hasn't been around as long. But I was one of the things you said about coexistence. I think one of the fundamental beliefs of Baha'i is that at heart, all religions are coming from the same place.
Yes.
They want to unify the religions back together again as a way of creating a greater harmony in human culture and human society. So that's different, like you said, because we usually think about religions trying to distinguish themselves from one another, trying to break down those barriers. Yeah.
The little video I included in my presentation, I thought described what you just said perfectly. And it talked about their beliefs. Again, it seems odd to say that there are multiple beliefs in a religion, because I feel like, for Christians, like they believe in God, and stuff like that. But with the Baha'i Faith, it was a whole paragraph of beliefs, but it wasn't like, hey, we believe in this one God. It was, we believe in taking all these faiths and kind of saying that, hey, like we can coexist. We're all the same. We all, derived from the same thing or things or whatever it may be. And I oh, I wish I could have sat down and talked to anyone of the faith. I know it would have been so incredibly interesting and so eye-opening and amazing, and I'm super bummed I didn't get to do that. But yeah, that was probably one of the most fascinating ones that I found personally.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that you were kind of a victim of circumstances with that, and I hope your curiosity about this topic will continue, and that someday you'll
Sure.
to follow up with it. But for now, I just wanted to congratulate you and thank you on a project that helps to bring greater awareness to underrepresented religions.
Yeah, for sure.
Greater knowledge about underrepresented religions, because I think you're exactly right that knowledge and awareness are ways that we can try to heal the divides that separate us.
Mm-hmm.
Congratulations, you did a great job.
Thanks.
You're going to publish, we're out of time, but I'm just wondering, are you going to publish this on YouTube or anything? Is there a place where people can go to see your presentation, or is it just for class credit only?
Yeah, no, it is on Prezi because I made it with a Prezi, and if you go to Prezi and you type Prezi.com, sorry, and you type in the name of my presentation, it should come up. It is public, anyone can look it up. The title of my presentation is Underrepresented Religions in Southern Appalachia. So it should come up if you type in the search box. I did it on, my sister's computer, on my dad's computer, on our home computer, just to make sure it did work. So when I sent it to you,
that's how I found it. Yeah. So underrepresented religions in Southern Appalachia.
Yes, that's correct.
Great. Well, thank you, Marcy, for taking the time to meet with me today. I know you're staying at home, back at your parents' home with your siblings. I know it's not the way you wanted to end your senior year of college, but you're doing a great job. And maybe someday I'll see you as chief religion editor of the New York Times, huh?
Maybe, that'd be cool, but we'll see.
All right, well, thank you so much. Well, that's it for Religion and Life today. I hope you'll join me next week when my guest will be George Sigg, and he works with esoteric religions and apocalyptic traditions. Until then, this is Ozzie Ostwald.